24 hours on the Marin County Office of Education website, number one. Live Spanish translation is available, and so if anyone needs that, it's ready for you. Any resources that are mentioned during this presentation, along with any links that you'll see in the chat, will also be stood up on the website, so they'll be available to you. We want to thank all of you, those of you who have already submitted questions, particularly our student group that submitted several questions for our panelists. But anyone who has questions during this session, if you will go ahead and put them into the chat. If you don't recognize your precise question when it's actually asked, do know that we will do everything we can to make sure that all questions are addressed, but we might reword them to include a couple of questions that might come from different people. Just to give you a sense of what this will look like, we're going to start by hearing a few words from Assemblyman Mark Levine, who is honoring us by being here. Then you will have the chance to hear from our community panel, opportunity to ask questions, and then at the very end of this time, which will be approximately 6:20 or so, we will get to hear about trainings and opportunities that will be available to our community. So let me thank you again for joining us. And now I'm going to introduce briefly Assemblyman Mark Levine, represents the 10th Assembly District here in California, which is Marin County, Southern Sonoma County. He's a member of the California Legislative Jewish Caucus, has actually served as the chair for the 2017-18 session. Assemblyman Levine has been a strong supporter of all things access, equity, our schools, and we so appreciate you being here, Mark. So take it away.
Thank you, Mary Jane, for your introduction and for hosting this important forum. I'm grateful that our educational community, law enforcement, and community partners are taking this issue seriously. It is our duty to call out bigotry and anti-Semitism when we witness it. This morning, I reflected upon my first encounter with anti-Semitism when I was an elementary school student. Until today, I don't ever recall sharing it with anybody, not even my parents. I must have been in 3rd grade when I was walking home from school and another boy zipped by on his bike and shouted the ethnic slur, "Dirty Jew," at me. I couldn't believe what I heard. I didn't want to believe what he said. And I remember being in shock as though I'd been punched in the gut. I can't believe that after all these years, I can remember it so vividly. As a kid, I loved being a Jew, just as I do today, and had no idea that a bully could so easily make me feel insecure about my identity, my faith, about who I am. But it happened, just as it is happening in Marin schools today. I also reflected on the latest incident of anti-Semitism I've experienced. I'm a public figure, so off-color, bigoted comments on social media are sadly par for the course, even if it shouldn't be. But most recently, I joined Marin Independent Journal staff for a conversation on Google Meet. Another person who was invited to the conversation without prompt pointedly criticized Israel in connection with me. I'm comfortable talking about Israel, Italy, Iceland, but she specifically mentioned Israel and me. Why? Because I am a Jewish lawmaker and Israel is the Jewish state. I'm no longer a 3rd grader and was able to name this bold and blatant anti-Semitism designed to call out my Jewish identity, make me feel less secure about my identity, and even sow doubt in my ability to do my job. This is another form of anti-Semitism that happens daily on high school and college campuses across the country. It should end, and it must be named for what it is. We should all call out this bigotry when we see it, so it can be exposed. I'd like to address the draft of a model ethnic studies curriculum developed by the California Department of Education. Today, Governor Newsom will either sign into law or veto legislation requiring ethnic studies to be taught in our high schools effective in the 2029-30 academic year, conditioned upon whether state funding permits. I want to make sure this community knows that when anti-Semitic and anti-Israel lessons were included in the initial draft, I quickly called for the entire curriculum to be trashed and for the bigoted ideologues who worked on the draft to be removed. Both calls for action were embraced. I recognize that the new curriculum, even with the absence of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel lessons, is imperfect. That's why, along with my colleagues in the legislature, I work to ensure that if ethnic studies is required, local school districts are able to develop their own curricula, including ethnic groups and topics germane for students in the district, and that the model curriculum not be required. Additionally, my colleagues and I placed language in the proposed law that provides guardrails to protect against insertion of racist, bigoted, anti-Semitic, or anti-Israel lessons in any curriculum. Thank you to the students, parents, educators, and caring community members who are our partners today and onward to stand against anti-Semitism and bigotry. Through our actions, we can demonstrate how easy it is to stand up against and condemn hate. It shouldn't be that hard. Even when some in authority hesitate, we can act. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Assemblyman Levine. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for sharing your story. It means a lot. So let me now introduce you to and welcome our esteemed panel of community leaders. First, Stacy Friedman, the rabbi of the Congregation Rodolphe Shalom. Earl Tiptman, investigator for the Northern California Computer Crimes Task Force. Laurie Fergule, district attorney, Marin County. Jamie Nunez, Bay Area regional manager of Common Sense Media. Seth Brisk, regional director of the Anti-Defamation League. And to Tara Topier, who's the superintendent of the Tamalpais School District and will serve as the moderator for our panel. So Tara, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jane. Thank you, Assemblyperson Levine. Welcome and thank you to everyone attending the webinar tonight. We're here in response to recent anti-Semitic Instagram posts and incidents within county schools that targeted our Jewish students and families and justifiably caused tremendous fear and anger. These acts are part of a growing trend of anti-Semitism nationwide and within our own community. We are here to learn how we can come together to acknowledge the anti-Semitism that is present and take affirmative measures to combat it. As more and more of these incidents are disseminated online, it is up to us to shape the online identities of our children to better reflect values we want to see in our future lives. The organizations represented on the panel tonight believe that we can effectively fight anti-Semitism through education and collective commitment to improving as a community. Each of the panelists will now take a few minutes to make some opening statements, starting with Rabbi Friedman.
Thank you so much, Tara, and thank you so much, Mary Jane and the Marin County Office of Education for pulling us together and for your leadership. This is such a critically important webinar and subject, and also time in our nation. I'm grateful to be part of the panel. So I am the Senior Rabbi of Congregation Rodolphe Shalom, which is in San Rafael. I have been there for over 27 years, and I'm a 27-year plus resident of Mill Valley, very much of this community. And over the past few weeks, since this anti-Semitic incident came to light, in which Jewish students were targeted and singled out because they are Jewish, I've heard from many parents in the Jewish community. And I've spoken with a number of our Jewish students. And first, I just have to say to you parents and to students who have experienced this and whose friends have, I really want to thank you for standing up and for calling this out. And I wanted to really thank our educators and all the community leaders who have stood up and who are searching for ways to come together as a community to address this and denounce it. I'm really grateful to all of you, and particular to those first parents and students who took that brave step of standing up and calling it out. This is what I heard from so many of you, that to be a target of such malicious attacks and specifically being singled out is frightening, it's threatening, we're concerned, we're scared, and we're angry. And to target Jewish students in such a way and to add their names to a list is threatening, and it's a distinct act of bigotry and harassment. And to add to this, this act is so disturbing in and of itself, but all the more so because of its historical precedent during the Holocaust, when Jews were placed on lists to be deported and murdered. This is the historical precedent that is animated and sensitized when this type of thing happens. And so a few things. Number one, we need to name it when we see anti-Semitism or experience it. We need to call it out specifically for what it is and name it. As teachers, as community leaders, as parents, as students, it helps our students to own their experience. And it also makes people more aware of their specific words and deeds that may be damaging and harmful. To be vague, right? And to say that all prejudice is bad when they're in the face of a specific act of anti-Semitism or another act of prejudice. To be general in response to a specific act of anti-Semitism denies the experience of the person who personally is the victim. We can't ignore it because when we do, we normalize it. And we also can't explain it away by saying, you know, kids will be kids and teens are pushing the limits. This is unacceptable, as we know. We need to call it out and name it. And all the more so because what I've been hearing from students and what I've seen with my own two now 18 and 21-year-olds are that not only are we looking at this particular incident, but it's not isolated. The anti-Semitism that I've been witnessing and that many of you and your children have been experiencing in our schools and beyond is something that occurs every single day. Last year, I spoke with our community on the highest holy days of the year about anti-Semitism. And I explained an incident that a number of our students experience where other teens throw pennies, quarters in front of these Jewish kids. And they say, pick it up, Jew, or pick it up. And I was speaking with one of our young men, a 15, 14-year-old, and he had tears in his eyes. He's like, I never knew that was bad. I never knew that was bad. Why did he not know it was bad? Because nobody called it out, right? Maybe he didn't tell his parents, maybe he felt shamed. And that shame then becomes internalized. And when he thinks of himself as a Jewish human being, he internalized that shame. And we need to put an end to it. And that's why we're here today. We need to name it and we need to call it out unequivocally, to denounce it unequivocally when we see it, hear it, or experience it. In the Talmud, which was an ancient Jewish text about 1,500 years plus, we hear the following. If you see wrongdoing by a member of your household and you do not denounce it, you are responsible and accountable. And if you see wrongdoing by a member of your community and we do not denounce it, we are responsible and accountable as well. So here we are here together to do this. And it's so important for us to be able to see it, name it, call it out for what it is. Moreover, I've lived here for over 27 years, as I've mentioned. And over the past few years, there has been a significant uptick that I know that Seth Brisk will speak to this a little bit more, as there has been nationally in anti-Semitic instances. And I have to say this because I'm so disturbed, but when many of us saw the debate last night and when the president of our country refuses to denounce white supremacists, this trickles down to all of us. And for us to make a change in our community, in our nation, is to denounce and name it and put a stop to it, however small or large this is. So number 3, we need to name it. We need to denounce it swiftly, immediately, and resolutely. And number 3, we need to do more of what we're doing today, which is to come together, to support one another, to learn together, to study, to share each other's stories, not only the story of the present day time, but to understand our historical stories as well, to come together. Because anti-Semitism anywhere in our community is a stain against our entire community, against all of us. So we're here together to support one another, to share each other's stories, and to stand up resolutely, firmly, and unequivocally as we have today and will continue to do, to say that this is unacceptable in our schools, in our county, in our homes, and certainly online, to denounce anti-Semitism and to name it for what it is so that we don't continue, nobody in our community does, and to make sure that our young people understand what it is, both for the Jewish young people and also for all of us, so that we can put a stop to what we're seeing. And I really just want to say thank you to all of you who have stood up for your bravery, and for all of you who come together, even when we don't exactly know what to say, but to come together in an earnest desire to put an end to this. Thank you so much, and thank you for the honor of being here together today.
Thank you, Rabbi Friedman. Next is District Attorney Laurie Fergule.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and I very much appreciate the comments of the two speakers before me. And for the community of 393 people we have here tonight who have made the decision to stand up, come here and educate ourselves and see what we can learn about these acts and how we can support our community when these acts occur in our very midst, whether it's at school or somewhere else in our community. So together we are going to tackle this problem, and I appreciate everybody's commitment to that goal. First, as the prosecutor for the County of Marin, it's my honor to serve you, and there are certain ethical obligations that you have entrusted my office with, and me in particular. So I know people are coming here tonight maybe looking for the answer, like, is this a hate crime? Are we going to prosecute someone? And I'm, to be fully transparent, you're not going to get that answer tonight because one of the first and most important tenets of our criminal justice system, one of the most pivotal tenets, is that a person, even if they're charged with a crime, is innocent until they are proven guilty. And I think that's something that we all really need to take a step back and be mindful of, because sometimes we've heard that term in our recent past when prosecutors have made mistake, and there's been, to quote a term that we have all probably heard, a rush to judgment. And that is the last thing that as a community and my office wants to do in any case, particularly when a community is scared, in pain, and angry. We don't want to ever forget these tenets that you entrust my office with and that we carry with us to make sure that justice does occur in the right manner every time we go to court. So no matter how much as parents or children or even prosecutors, we want to make a quick decision, we can't do that. So to be clear tonight, I am speaking about hate crimes in general, what the general rules are about hate crimes, how we apply them, and speaking after me will be my investigator, Earl Tiptman, who will talk to you about some of the tools that we use when we investigate these crimes. And that's pretty much, as I see our role tonight, to explain to you the lane that we stay in as criminal prosecutors. So one thing we need to think about is just because you may have heard that somebody said something or did something or saw something, oftentimes that turns out not to be accurate information. Sometimes it turns out to be really accurate information. But what we want to do when we make a decision in a hate crime is make sure we have looked at all the totality of the facts in the cases. And in order to prove a hate crime, there's kind of two big factors that hurdles that we have to make sure we can jump and prove beyond a reasonable doubt when we file a case. First, we have to have an underlying crime, a criminal offense, whether it be a threat or battering someone, damaging their property. We've heard about cases where churches have been vandalized and people have been beaten or assaulted, accompanied by behavior or signs of religious beliefs or language. So first we have an underlying crime, and then we also need to prove that that crime was committed in whole or in part because the person that committed that crime believed that the person they harmed or the property they damaged belonged to a certain nationality, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or even of a perceived disability, or that the person or group who was damaged associated with someone from one of these protected classes. And also there are more serious offenses if that a crime is committed in conjunction with damaging somebody, threatening someone, or actually injuring them. So those are the two biggest hurdles in general that we have to jump over and be able to prove to our certainty before we file a case that we can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court. If we can't do that, then unfortunately, we may not be able to file criminal charges. So sometimes it happens, frankly, that We have cases where there's hateful and harmful and damaging behavior and words and conduct, but it just doesn't meet the legal criteria that we have to follow ethically as prosecutors. And again, we work for you, and you trust us to make that judgment and do the right thing every day in every case for every person that we deal with. So if it should turn out that a situation, and again, I'm not talking about this particular situation that brought us here. The reason why we're here tonight is to talk about not only our religious worlds, our community worlds, our social worlds, and our school worlds, and the criminal worlds, but what we can do together, unified, to really deal and address with this issue, whether it's a criminal act or not. So I just want to share with you a couple of things, programs that my office is involved in to increase our community unity in this area. So we are involved in a program called Not in Our Town. It's an anti-bullying, anti-hatred campaign and working towards inclusive communities. So we belong to those groups in Novato and also San Rafael. And the Novato Police Department, as part of Not in Our Town, actually has a hate crime hotline. And you can call them anonymously and report behavior that you've seen or heard. My office also has a hate crime hotline that is monitored 5 days a week. And we return calls to people if they give us information. You can leave your name or you can provide information anonymously. And at some of our Not in Our Town meetings, people said, well, what if I don't know the person? Or what if I don't think it's a crime? It's okay. In fact, we encourage you to let us know the behavior you're seeing, because you might not be the only one who's seen or heard of this behavior. And sometimes it gives us that extra information that we needed to corroborate something that someone told us and help us build a case. So please don't ever hesitate, no matter what police jurisdiction you live in, to contact my office or any of your local police departments. Or if you want to be anonymous, contact our hate crime hotlines and let us know what's going on. Also, to take it one step further, Novato Not in Our Town is in the process of creating a response group where if there is an incident, whether it's criminal or not, we are going to have trained volunteers in our community who can reach out to the people who've been affected and victimized by this conduct and provide them the support that they need. And in the whole spirit of Not in Our Town, standing up and saying, we don't tolerate this behavior in our town. We're here to support you. So that's a little bit about how the DA's office is involved in these crimes. And as far as putting the cases together and investigating them, I'm going to turn it over to Earl Tiptman.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Earl Tiptman. I'm an investigator with the Marin County District Attorney's Office. I'm also a 25-year veteran of the Novato Police Department. During my career at Novato PD, I also served as a school resource officer for 4 years during my time with Novato. And working as a school resource officer, primarily my duty was to work with juveniles and secondary schools and deal with specific crimes committed by kids and or problems, much like the incident that brought all of us together this evening. There are many aspects to an investigation for law enforcement before we can actually bring it to the district attorney's office. And one of the things that requires us, that being law enforcement, is that we have to take a particular code that we believe is the violation. And the state and the federal government are very strict as to what criteria has to be met to prove a criminal violation. And so with investigators, our job is to actually go out and seek as much information as we possibly can, as DA, Deputy District Attorney Laurie Fergule said, corroborate that with additional evidence. We're now in a setting today in our current environment in which electronic devices are used in multiple ways. And in the past, where we had a thug or an armed robbery where someone would actually confront someone physically and harm them and steal whatever was on their possession, we see less and less of that today. And what we're seeing more and more is actually cyber crimes. So the very topic tonight through social networking, through computer systems, through cell phones. And this is an area that is constantly evolving for all of us. Currently in the industry, the change in technology happens about every 75 days. So for law enforcement to try and stay on top of the current changes in technology to try and address these type of crimes that occur through electronic devices becomes very, very difficult. And our job here at the Northern California Computer Crimes Task Force is to assist local law enforcement agencies to help develop additional information by our special tools and the experts of our forensic team in extracting information and developing information to help build a criminal case. It can be very, very difficult as law enforcement and the law moves forward to address various levels of cyber crimes, and I just want to generically use that term, is that the technology continues to change. The requirements placed on law enforcement through judges and attorneys in regards to privacy acts become very difficult for us as well. And so we're always having to deal with these challenges as the technology changes and as the industry changes. These are very, very costly items in regards to the technology that we use to identify and help develop information in criminal cases, and particularly hate crime type cases. And what we're left with is trying to serve a number of agencies and help give them direction and guidance as to what to look for in their criminal cases related to electronic devices, what avenues they need to address, and then ultimately when they meet those objectives and they are able to seek what we call search warrants and or consents to get into the electronic devices, well, this is where my unit, the task force, comes into play to help extract that information on a legal basis so we can better put forward a very, very solid case in regards to criminal activity. And again, I mean, this is an area in regards to what we're dealing with today in regards to hate speech, anti-Semitism, race relations across the board today. I was a juvenile officer back in the mid-90s. A lot of this has not changed in my experience over the years of being in law enforcement. Where it's moved from being a personal contact is now actually moved into a completely new arena with electronic devices. So I'm going to reach out a little bit beyond my expertise on investigations and what we do as a task force and just lay out a message is that, as I said when I was a school resource officer, is that all adults, parents, teachers, staff, everyone involved as adults, especially with electronic devices, we really, really need to be aware of what our kids and our young society are doing with these devices, what programs they're researching, what social networks they're accessing, what emails that they're opening that maybe have spyware or an intrusion from an outside source that they're not aware of. So besides the criminal element and developing an investigation, I think another component with tonight is to start developing more education in regards to electronic devices for our community as a whole. You know, with our adult population, certainly our teen population, and work collaboratively with our school system and teachers and staff on better how to address and look for signs of possible hate that comes across in electronic devices. I'm available at all times. I want to say that I want to echo what our DA Laurie Fergule said, is that you need to reach out to your local law enforcement agencies whenever something like this occurs. The little bit of information helps us a great deal, no matter how many times that we get it. It helps support what we're looking for and helps build a case. I'm a resident of Marin, have been most of my life. I grew up here. I graduated from high school here in Marin. I have a vested interest in what goes on in our community. And I am of a racial background myself, although I don't really appear that way, but I am. So I certainly sympathize with the topic tonight. So with that, then we'll move on to our next speaker. So thank you.
Thank you, Earl. Our next speaker is Jamie Nunez from the Bay Area Regional Manager of Common Sense Media.
Thank you, Tara. Appreciate it. And thank you all, 424 of you that are here. I am, as Tara pointed out, I'm the Bay Area Regional Manager for Common Sense Media, and we are essentially the leading nonprofit. And our work is really about addressing these very complex issues that we'll talk about and we'll address tonight around our kids' usage of social media and media just to begin with. But there are no words to paint for you, and I want to kind of begin to humanize this experience for you all. To the person that, or the individuals that wrote the names down without recognizing their history, without recognizing the ramifications of those decisions that they made. Let me be clear that that doesn't happen by design. That doesn't happen by reaction. It happens from years and years of complex sort of relationships that develop online. And that doesn't actually forgive the person, but what I will let that person know, or what will I let the community know, is to say, we need to teach our kids the value of understanding what they post online has deep ramifications for themselves, the community like Marin, and the world around them. And so I'm going to ask you to do the following, you 423 individuals that are here. I'm going to ask you first and foremost to move away from the screen for about 5 seconds to acknowledge and to celebrate your child for what they are. So give them a hug, let them know that you really care about them. And once you've done that, and once you've recognized that they are a part of like you and part of your sort of family unit, I'm going to encourage you, and I'm going to ask you to do the hug and encouragement at the same time, but I'm going to encourage you from this day moving forward to teach them, if you haven't already, to teach them to think critically about the usages of media and the usages of online spaces that they're a part of. Hate speech in particular, and our kids need to feel validated on these platforms, whether it's Instagram or whether it's getting validation through TikTok, is, in our opinion, a very complex sort of nuanced behavior that our kids are developing. You know, it's very easy to say that's the perpetrator and that's the victim. But when I start compounding all of the likes and all the validations that these experiences happened online from kids, or kids that refuse to say something for fear that they're going to be picked on themselves, what I'm pointing at is that these issues are very, very complex. And I'm also pointing out that we have an opportunity to teach our kids what not only well-being is online, but what citizenship looks like. What does it actually mean to stand up to the person and say, that's actually not right? What does it mean to stand up to someone that said some subtle comments about something about someone else, right? And for us to understand as parents, we have to amplify that voice when we see our kids actually performing those acts. But more importantly, we have to understand when our own child is exhibiting some of those behaviors that social media magnifies, right? I don't want to let Instagram or folks off the hook here, because they do have a huge role in perpetuating these sort of these things that happen in this form. But what I will say is the conversations that we have as parents to our kids about the usages of these spaces is very real and has a direct impact with our kids. So I'm going to take the role on behalf of social media to begin with, and let you kind of know that we have a role as a community to actually put equal blame in our social platforms that perpetuate this sort of dopamine fix in our kids. And we know time and time again that our kids want to get that fix, right? They want to see that their post is the highest, or that they're getting the validation on the likes of their peers. And I'm not justifying what was done, because I don't have the context, and I certainly, I'm not going to comment on that, because that is not my role here. But what I will say is that if I had come across that particular post as an individual, as a peer, as a colleague to that person, and I knew that was happening, what what I'm presented with is quite a number of dilemmas, right? Number one, if I'm going to say something, I might fear that that person's going to attack me. Number two is, what is the actual consequence that the school will actually have on this child before they remove that post? And three, what exactly can I say to this person that enables them to change their mind about what they're thinking about? And again, let me point out that hurt has been already done in our community. What I think we have an opportunity to do moving forward is to ensure that our kids are not only safe online, but that they're thinking critically about the experiences that they have to reinforce the values that you set as a family. And let me be clear, knowing the Jewish brothers and sisters that I've come across in my lifetime, one thing that I've always appreciated and always admired about our community is the fact that we are very resilient, and that we teach our kids to be resilient in times of suffering or in times of pain. And so with that, I will be happy to take questions on behalf of what digital citizenship or digital wellness looks like. But if you take a moment now to celebrate and hug your child, that would be really helpful as well. So thank you all. And I appreciate the presence of being here. So.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And Seth Brisk from the Anti-Defamation League.
Thank you, Superintendent Topier, Superintendent Burke. Glad to be here this evening, and but very sad for the reasons. I want to echo everything that Rabbi Friedman said in her opening remarks. It's very important when we do encounter hate that we name it specifically, that we speak out against it swiftly, and that we do so unequivocally. And these are some of the same conversations that we've been having with the superintendents, with the Marin County School District, that we have with law enforcement when we encounter these types of hate. At ADL, we'd like to talk about 3 responses to confronting hate. You speak up, you show strength, and you share facts. So speaking up has happened. People are doing that. I see the people speaking up for themselves in the chat. I know that the office has in Marin County have been receiving your comments. We've been receiving your comments, and that's important. Showing strength is showing up here as a community, making sure, reassuring your children, reassuring yourselves that there are things that you can do. You have tools and resources at your disposal. And now I'm going to share some facts with you. And hopefully tonight will be the start of many episodes, many opportunities for you to share facts with one another and to learn for your children and for yourselves throughout the year. Because we know that an incident like this is not necessarily isolated. It likely is an indication of a deeper problem. And we know that it requires an ongoing and a sustained response. So not just this year, not just this month, not just this year, in future years. It is like any other aspect of education. It's going to require continuous reinforcement and re-education and learning. We are all biased in different ways. Sometimes our biases are implicit, sometimes they are explicit. And we can all learn and continue to grow so that we become better and better members of the community. So let's start with some facts. I'm going to share with you my screen. In 1 second. Okay, so many of you probably are aware that we are in the midst of not only a pandemic of a virus that is keeping us apart from one another, but we're also in the midst of an epidemic of hate. And in particular, we have hate that's targeting the Jewish community. So here you see anti-Semitic incidents. Now these are incidents. They include not only hate crimes, as District Attorney Fergule was telling us about, but also acts of hatred that are legal, handing out flyers that say bigoted and anti-Semitic things, shouting anti-Semitic or bigoted statements, as we heard from Assemblymember Levine. Those types of incidents are not illegal, but nevertheless, they hurt. Words matter. And so we see here anti-Semitic incidents over the last decade, and in particular, you look at last year, ADL recorded more anti-Semitic incidents last year than in any other year that we've been keeping record, and that dates back to the 1970s. And you notice also that in the last 3 years, there's been a sharp uptick and very high numbers of anti-Semitic incidents taking place. Now, I mentioned that these are not hate crimes, so let's take a look at that. Now, the hate crime statistics for the federal government, that the federal government releases, are not available at this time. They have not released those numbers. But what we do know is that the Attorney General for the state of California, Javier Becerra, released his report for the year of 2019. What we saw is that there was, although it was a slight decrease in overall hate crimes, there was a nearly 12% increase in hate crimes targeting Jews. That the only murder recorded as a hate crime in the state of California last year was that of Laurie Gilbert Kay at her synagogue in Poway, California. And that Jews, as is consistent over time, are targeted more than all other religious groups combined. In fact, somebody who's Jewish per capita is more likely to be targeted by a hate crime than any other group. And so while other groups are targeted more often, Jews per capita can expect to be targeted most of all. There's more information here. You have the URL for our hate crime map. It's an interactive map. I show you a snapshot of it here where you can go in and look at hate crimes that have occurred in your community so you can understand more about the issues, what types of crimes, what types of ideologies are involved. And they also go back in time, so you can look back in prior years to track different types of hate crime activity in communities around the country. So what can we do about it? Well, I mentioned before that words matter. ADL's former national director, Abe Foxman, was a Holocaust survivor. He used to say that the infamous death camp, Auschwitz, was not built with bricks, but it was built with words. Now, why did he say that? Well, in order to get to a point where you can commit genocide, there first has to be a normalization of bias and bigotry, of hatred, so that neighbors, colleagues, even friends would be either willing to or participate in the carting off of other members of their community for annihilation. And so we describe it here in ADL through this pyramid of hate. At the bottom are biased attitudes. Everybody has them. Most people don't act out on them. Sometimes we don't even realize that they're there. A smaller number of people will actually move from biased attitudes to acts of bias. Again, these may not be illegal, and they may simply be part of maturation process, but nevertheless, they hurt. From there, it's taking that act to a step further, acts of discrimination. From there to violence, and of course to genocide. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody who holds a biased attitude will go out and commit genocide. But in order for somebody to commit violence or discrimination, they had to have first passed through those first levels of the pyramid before they got to that act, to committing that act. And that's why we say it's very important to disrupt hate at its earliest moments. And that's why education is critical. And we have proof. Recently, ADL, in partnership with the Holocaust Memorial Center and the Shoah Foundation, conducted a survey of college students who had participated in Holocaust education. Now, of course, we know that they had greater knowledge about the Holocaust, but there were other benefits to learning about the Holocaust, that they were more open to different points of view, that they were willing to challenge intolerant behavior on the part of others, and also that they had higher critical thinking skills, which is why we're looking forward to working with the Holocaust Center of Northern California to provide programming for Marin County that you're going to be hearing about later on, either tonight or in the follow-up communications after this program. But that's not all. It's important, again, for, oops, let me exit the screen here. There we go. That's not all. It's important for everyone to educate themselves, to reassure their children, as I said, when they encounter hate. And here are some resources that I'm posting in the chat for you to be able to use. First is a comprehensive guide that describes different aspects of anti-Semitism. It's free to download. It's on the ADL website. And it talks about classic anti-Semitic tropes. We've heard about a few of them already, and how they manifest, and where they come from, and how to respond. So if you have a question about whether or not you've encountered anti-Semitism, this can be a helpful guide. In addition, I've just posted one of many, many discussions that are available on the ADL website to help you have conversations with children in an age-appropriate fashion when they do encounter anti-Semitism or other forms of bias and bigotry. Here's a discussion guide based on anti-Semitism. Again, it's free to download. It's available on our website. There are many others that we call table talk conversations, where you can engage in a conversation with your family around the dinner table when you encounter acts of hatred, when you encounter hate speech or other forms of bias and bigotry, as well as recommendations of various books on a variety of topics that can help you to inform those discussions, as well as guides for talking about those pieces of literature. So I'm going to stop there. But again, important for everyone to speak up, to show strength, to share facts. And you've taken the first step by being here tonight. And I thank you very much for doing so.
Thank you very much, Seth. Very informative, lots of great stuff on the website. So we're going to move into questions. Ken, I think are we starting with the pre-submitted ones?
We are, thank you. We'll start with some pre-submitted questions and then get to questions that are in the chat. We'll actually start with some questions that came to us from students. We've heard a lot here about bigotry and hate crimes, but what actually constitutes an act of anti-Semitism? Anybody want to take that?
I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that. So there are, anti-Semitism is sometimes referred to as the oldest hate. And it manifests in many different ways. And it has changed how it has manifested more recently. So I'll just give you some definitions, some examples of expressions of anti-Semitism. And these derive from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, which was adopted by the US State Department under the Obama administration, is used by the European Union, some of the agencies of the United Nations, and the Department of Education in the United States. So calling for aiding or justifying the killing and harming of Jews. Let me share my screen. That'll probably be easier. So here you see them. Now I've highlighted in the dark blue ways that are oftentimes connected to Israel. So there is legitimate criticism of Israel, but when criticism of Israel tends to demonize, delegitimize, or apply a double standard, we're often not talking about legitimate criticism of Israel or Israeli government policy or Israeli leaders, but we're often talking about ways in which Israel or Zionism is being used as a mask to cover for anti-Semitism.
Okay. Moving on to the next question, and there are several related to the actual incident and what is being done about it, so we can summarize this question that's actually two parts. What is the school administration and what is law enforcement doing to find out who is behind the social media postings, and what is being done to ensure the safety while this incident is being investigated?
So thank you. I can start by saying that as a school district, we have interviewed many people, interviewed many students and family members. We have also worked very closely with the local law enforcement, and we have worked with our own IT department to see if there's ways of identifying. Further, we have been in touch with someone at Instagram to find out if there are ways that we can get these instances addressed. We find out who they are. you know, it can be very challenging when you can't definitively identify somebody, but we are taking all of the reports very seriously. We are keeping a close eye on anyone who is considered a suspect. We are also doing a lot of education. We have in the past and will in the future this year, partnering with the ADL. We've been in communication with Seth and the educational coordinators at ADL to do more sustained lesson planning and implementation of lessons for all students in our district. I don't know who wants to answer the law enforcement side. I don't know if you can.
I will. I'll speak on behalf of myself and Earl. The case is currently still under investigation, and that's really all I can say at this moment in time. There are a number of tools that we can pursue if we have accurate information enough that we can convince a judge that we have enough evidence to obtain a search warrant to get evidence. We can do that. So all options are on the table. And other than that, I can't really discuss any more about where the investigation is at this moment in time. And somebody did ask when it might be known publicly if criminal charges are filed. And in a juvenile case, if the case involves a juvenile, that information is usually protected, and it's protected for the right of the youth. So it's quite possible in that venue that it might not become public information because as a matter of law, because a lot of times juveniles conduct offenses and can get them off their record quite easily. And it's not the kind of thing that we always want to stay with the person's record, especially in these times that we have when people do learn and change from their behavior. And we have restorative justice programs that we use. Sometimes that's an option we use in handling and resolving cases in my office. So I know that might not be a satisfying answer to many people, but it's where we're at and how it works here. So,
Laurie, can I just add one more piece
Sure.
to that?
Sure.
Yeah, for everyone listening, I just want to assure you that the local law enforcement agency is continue to vet out all information in regards to this situation and determine whether or not it's an actual crime. And they've actually solicited our help here at the Northern California Computer Crimes to assist them and help give direction. So I just want to assure all of our viewers that it continues to take place and will continue to take place until the matter is actually resolved in one way or another.
The next question, and actually there are several related to curriculum, and again, it's a two-parter. Are any schools adding or changing any curriculum to teach more about Jewish history? And members of the Jewish community and leaders of Jewish organizations have concerns about the ethnic studies model curriculum being developed by CDE, that was touched on a bit earlier, saying that it excludes the Jewish experience and depicts Zionism as racist. How can we effectively confront anti-Semitism at the same time that we open the classroom to such content?
Thank you. Yeah, so I would start by saying that we do have 10th grade required curriculum and that the Jewish experience and Jewish history and Jewish diaspora are included in that. And, you know, furthermore, the social studies curriculum framework, the new one, actually expands the coverage of historically marginalized or oppressed groups. So there is more inclusion of the impact on the Jewish community, on LGBTQ community, in some cases on women. So there is an expansion within our overall social studies curriculum framework to include more history of oppressed people and including Jewish experience. I can briefly speak to the framework. I think other people are a little more versed on it. What I can tell you is, you know, the framework, if passed, does not have to be adopted by a school district. And we would not adopt anything without having a broad community conversation around the ethnic studies required course. So I want to share that definitively.
Ken, can I just add to that? The other piece that's being referenced in the chat is sort of the status of AB 331. Just a reminder, that's on the governor's desk now. Today's the last day for him to sign, and that's what Assemblyman Levine talked about. That would require ethnic studies for all high school students starting in the year 2930. Based on what we think we know, the governor is not going to sign that. All right, so that's number one, and we'll know that today, but we're like, I would say 99% he's not going to sign it. In our county, the high school superintendents have asked that we all work together, each of the high school superintendents, as we look at the approach to ethnic studies in our community to make sure that it is both balanced and inclusive. So there'll be more coming on that. The team has identified sort of their first meeting coming up. So we'll be working locally, while the ultimate decision will lie in the hands of each of the school district, school board superintendents. Will be working on that together. So there's a little bit more information on that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that we've offered to Superintendent Burke, Superintendent Topier, and some of their colleagues ADL lesson plans that talk about some of these things. There's one lesson in particular that we have which talks about aspects of anti-Semitism as experienced by different members of the Jewish community from around the world. So while it talks about anti-Semitism, it also gives a world into the diversity within the Jewish community, Jews from different parts of the world, their experiences, why they became immigrants, why they became refugees. And it's actually done digitally so that it can be replicated out and distributed widely. And of course, sadly in this pandemic, that wouldn't prevent us from being able to offer it to any of the schools that are interested.
Seth, sort of as a follow-up to that, let me read a comment that a teacher submitted, and it's also a question that's come in from several people. I'm a teacher at the largest middle school in Marin. I teach 7th grade English and social studies. I'm grateful for the ADL's lessons. Specifically, I teach the pyramid of hate because so many of the hateful incidents we see in our community are at the lower levels of the pyramid. I believe we need to teach students the problems with hate and jokes at an early age. It's a similar question to the one that just came in. My kids began experiencing anti-Semitism in middle school. How can we start earlier in working with our students?
Well, it's in many respects, it's never too early to deal with these issues. There are some ADL programs that even start in preschool, but we typically start at the beginning of K through 12. And again, it's important to disrupt hate at its earliest moments, as I said before. No one's born hating. No one's born with bias and bigotry in their heart. They learn it. They learn it from their environment. They learn it from the systems that we have in place in our society. They learn it from other things within the where they go and other members of their community and their family. So if we can disrupt it at an early point, then we have a very good chance. I would say that adopting programs, teaching the kinds of lessons that we have, there are many other excellent providers of these kinds of programs aside from ADL that also provide excellent programs, which is one of the reasons why our signature program with schools that works at elementary schools as well as middle schools and high schools is called No Place for Hate. Now, within that framework, No Place for Hate allows for schools to institute their own programs. They can build and design their own ways of confronting the bias and bigotry they know need to be addressed within their community. So it makes sure that the students, the teachers, the parents, the administrators are all joining together and taking ownership and have an agency over their own community and their own campus life. That No Place for Hate framework encourages the community to develop their own programs. We offer ours as well. But we also are happy to welcome the other programs that are out there. Not in Our Town was mentioned earlier tonight. The Southern Poverty Law Center. There are a lot of great providers out there, Common Sense Media, that do the kind of work of confronting bias and bigotry in a variety of ways. So I think the answer is to get started and to keep it going And, we learn through repetition and through doing.
Anyone else on that one? Okay, thank you. What violations can and cannot be considered under school jurisdiction? Can hate speech by a student outside of school be subject to discipline by school administrators?
Let me briefly comment really quickly on that. As it relates to social media, as it relates to that, just know that it's very difficult, and hopefully the superintendent will address this. Any incident that happens on a platform can often be A, very difficult to decipher where the origin is at, and B, the context by which the message is shared can often be somewhat vague, right? And so we can be experiencing quite a bit of online hate without the child or the person actually knowing it. And so by the time it's actually deciphered or identified as actual hate speech, those things are often taken down. So I want to just be clear that back to Seth's point, it's very, very pertinent that we kind of teach our kids the way that they navigate these spaces online. Can make it really difficult for administrators, but B, can also make it an opportunity for us to say, we as a school district, we stand behind these values. And so if we catch you doing this, or if you're part of this, these are the types of consequences that you should expect to see from us. And I'm sorry to cut you off there, Superintendent Tubb.
No, that's exactly right. That it's very difficult. We have to be able to prove identity of the perpetrator. And if and when we can, then yes, if there's a nexus, they call it a nexus to school, and certainly this had a nexus to school, that it causes widespread disruption and access to education for other students. And so yes, it can be addressed.
Next question is, can schools adopt a policy that hate crimes, whether federal or state defined, will be met with expulsion in every case where they're proven? If not, what aspects of a hate crime incident would not be worthy of an expulsion?
So mandatory expulsion is set by California Ed Code, and anything labeled under a hate crime would also be captured in California Ed Code for mandatory expulsion.
There are a lot of questions on the opposite end of that spectrum related to the result being expulsion, and that's about restorative justice. Are there programs that schools or that law enforcement can undertake to address situations like this that are using a restorative approach? And are we aware of best practices, since this must be occurring all over the country?
I can speak to, I think there's a both, and we do respond with restorative practices. And I know in Marin County, there's youth court and there's lots of resources available. We also use an organization called Circle Up out of Oakland to facilitate restorative circles. It's a both and. There's, when the harm is so severe, there's a, there has to be a time and a place when restoration can happen, and people need to be open to it. And that needs to be, the victims need to be open to it, and they need to be the ones, because that's the harm being restored. And so I think there is an opportunity for education and deeper learning. And so I think there is opportunities for restorative practices across the county.
Laurie, anything about the restorative end of things with law enforcement?
Law enforcement within their departments, I think, are aware of restorative practices. Right now, we have a new probation chief, and he is very a big proponent of restorative practices. We already use that within our office, within our staff, honestly. We have some restorative practitioners who have met with us on a granular level to look at our own biases that we may have, and or that we do have. And we're meeting with probation as we speak to expand our horizons and how we can build restorative practices within our office and how we treat particularly youth and adults as well. So that, to me, nothing is off the table in these kind of cases, and it certainly is an option and has actually been discussed in other situations, not similar to this, but with the same kind of harmful behavior, that where we have willing participants who are willing, number one, the victims to participate, and also the people who made the statements or performed the actions or whatever it is. They have found that the more anger and angst and fear related to an incident, the more successful restorative practices are, because the parties really get to understand one another and the harm that they've done. So we hope to keep moving forward on that with our probation department. So there definitely is an opportunity for that. And I know all our schools are embracing this, so it's really wonderful to see.
Anybody else on that one? Okay. Is there a way to centralize across the county how Jews and Jewish history is being taught in our schools? Why does every district need to teach about Jews and our history differently? Can this be something that can be organized countywide?
You know, that is something that's happening more and more frequently. As Mary Jane stated, we're coming together in curriculum groups to share best practices and resources, and come together around, you know, specific like ADL resources. How are we all, you know, can we all agree to use these resources so that we're making sure we're having a more uniform experience? That being said, every district does have authority over their own curriculum.
Okay. There are a number of questions, again, related to this specific incident and how it could be classified potentially as a crime. Can the district attorney highlight by what standard her office would determine what kind of hate speech or posting would actually qualify as a crime?
You know, I can't tell you the specific four corners of what crimes we would be looking at. And the standard that we use, I did just post because it's a rather long one, the burden of proof that we are required to have in our hearts and ethically when we file a case. I put that in the chat for people to read. I did that at 6:01 p.m. so people can find that in the chat. And that's a standard that we ethically have to know, that when we file a criminal case, whether it's against a juvenile or an adult, we have to believe that we can prove a case to that standard before we file it.
Great. We've covered quite a few.
And can I jump in really quickly?
Yep.
I think I've seen in some of the chat and what came in, something that might be helpful. I think some people are wondering, like, where does hate speech become a hate crime? How do you determine, you know, what a hate, you know, when does that become a crime? I think I'm hearing and seeing a lot of questions around.
Right. There are several crimes, threats, certain threats to kill someone or harm someone. If it's accompanied with that mindset that we can prove, with a hateful mind, for lack of a better term right now, then that would be something we would consider. Or like a classic example is if you vandalize someone's property and, you know, leave anti-Semitic or any kind of other hateful messages or say something. Most of the time, people accompany their conduct with something that they say. But sometimes some speech is protected, and we have had to litigate many cases in court that have been determined to be free speech, and that's the way of our world and how our Constitution works. There is certain speech that is protected, but when you accompany it with that state of mind, that intent in your mind for a different purpose, that's when it becomes criminal. And when we get these search warrants that Earl referred to, we always require, number one, we have to be convinced that it is a crime, and that we have to get a warrant approved by a judge. So there's different levels of scrutiny. There's law enforcement takes a report, and my office reviews it, and then in order to get a search warrant, we still have to have judicial review. So when we're conducting these investigations, they're complicated and they take time. So that's part of what's going on, but also I think it's important to protect everyone involved including the people who are suspected of these crimes, that these different levels of scrutiny are really important for everybody's constitutional protection. So I hope that answers the question.
Okay. James, this might be a question where you would have some good advice. What type of safety measures are there for electronic devices, cell phones, iPads, computers that can assist in protecting our children and lessening the occurrences of this one? And are there proactive measures there for parents regarding how to address the habits of their child and teen's cell phone use?
Great question, whoever wrote it. Thank you for sharing that. There's a responsibility I pointed out at the beginning, right? We refer to them as our rings of responsibility, particularly around the device itself. We want to be mindful that the child is aware of what they can do with the device. So early on, you know, instead of handing the child just a sort of a cell phone for passively consuming content, we want to be intentional about what our role is when that child's in front of the device, right? When they get into middle school, when they want to try to define who they are as individuals, they want to be validated by their peers. You may introduce them to social media. They might be connected to things like Fortnite. What we want to be mindful of is how our kids are actually socializing, right? When they get upset, what do? When they want to validate someone, what are the things that they should be mindful of? When they do experience it, those I'm just kidding, or, you know, these are comments that go against my values or a culture. What do? How do they respond? Have we created a space in our family for our kids to talk openly about that? And then finally, I would challenge us all to think about what agency looks like in all of this, right? So it's one thing to react to these incidents. These are incidents that we need to react to, rightfully so. It's another thing for that child to then say, when I come across these things, whether it's on YouTube that our president is saying or someone is saying, like, how am I going to respond as a person that reinforces my own connection to this particular world? Are you going to be responding with hate, or are you going to be responding with actual action, right? And then I think we owe it to our kids to come up with those safety nets, so we can say, when you do experience this, here's what the school district is doing about it, here's what your school teacher is going to be doing about it, and here's the space where you can actually go for additional support outside of school, so you feel validated and that these incidents don't identify who you are. And so, you know, I don't know if I went around the question, but, you know, specifically around tech and monitoring tech, the biggest thing, probably the most important advice that I might be able to provide families is know what your kids are doing by asking and being curious about those experiences that they have when no one is looking, right? Especially when they're in high school, right? You want to move away from, we're spending 5 hours a day online, to, hey, when you were in the breakout room in science class and were there moments where you felt uncomfortable? Or if you've been identified as a target, what did you actually do in that moment? Because if your child sort of looks at you in a blank stare, that tells me we need to actually educate them about those experiences when they're online. And I'm happy to provide you more kind of content and resources about that on our site, but that's what I would probably say to start with.
Can I just add that I absolutely agree with everything that Jamie said. But this also goes to a point that we made earlier about speaking up, that there are lots of ways to speak up. So first of all, you can speak up, but only if you know what's going on in your child's online life and in their digital footprint. And they need to understand that while it seems like it has there is no responsibility there, or it's not going to really do anything because it's just words on a screen, it absolutely has a real world impact. And we've seen lots of occasions where online behavior translates into real world activity. I'm posting in the chat.
Oops. Seth,
Sorry, I'm posting. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm posting in the chat another resource that we have. And just a quick story. The reason that this came about was we had people who were speaking up about Zoom bombing that was going on at the beginning of the pandemic. And this was as Zoom was just really taking off and nobody really understood it very well. And it was because people spoke up, not only to the provider themselves. So even though you may be frustrated, you may not feel that whatever that social media platform is, if it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or whomever, and they're not responsive, it's still important to keep filing those reports. It's still important to let them know about them. And when you report it, if you report it to an agency like ours, we can also help sometimes. So for instance, Zoom bombing was not a known thing. We got a hold of this information from people saying, this is happening to us. We're having our private conversations, or our classrooms are being interrupted. What can we do about it? And we went to the company and said, hey, you need to add some additional security protocols. Fortunately, Zoom was receptive to that. They changed the security settings to make them more at a higher level as a default, and so that you wouldn't have to add those things. They also added some other protocols that they hadn't even considered, because up until that point, Zoom was just a way for business people to connect. They didn't think it would be used in this way. So there are all kinds of good consequences that can come from speaking up. And when you're in an online situation, when you're in a social media situation, if you see hate, if you encounter hate, or even in real life, you don't have to be an expert necessarily. It can be as simple as saying, I'm not okay with that. Putting that in the comment, adding that to the chat, putting that up, saying that to somebody when they say something that you find offensive and you know is a form of bias or bigotry. You don't have to provoke a confrontation. You don't have to get involved in an argument. It simply says to the aggressor, I'm not with you. And to the person who's the target of that aggression, you have an ally in me. And that will fundamentally change the dynamic. So again, speak up.
So great. So with that, we're going to end our question and answer period. Thank you, Tara, Jamie, Stacy. Thank you, Earl, Laurie. Ken, thanks for managing the questions. And Seth, thank you very much for being with us this evening. We appreciate it more than you'll know, and look forward to other opportunities to bring you all together on behalf of our community. So at this point, I'm going to introduce you to Morgan Blum Schneider, the Director for Jewish Family and Children's Services Holocaust Center, who will explain for you some upcoming opportunities for our community. And this sort of speaks to what all of our panelists have said, that we need to make sure this isn't a one-shot deal, that we will commit into the future and beyond to be sure that we're continuing to provide opportunities for all members of our community. So this is our start. And for those of you that were asking questions about, is this just about a certain district? This is a collaboration of each and every school district in Marin County who are committing to this effort. So Morgan, welcome, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Mary Jane, and thank you to all the panelists for such an informative and important discussion this evening. So as Mary Jane said, my name is Morgan Blum Schneider, and I am with the JFCS Holocaust Center. As we discuss this evening, the recent anti-Semitic incidents in our schools is really upsetting. This community is really important to me. I personally grew up in Marin and attended the Reed schools myself. And we at JFCS are invested in leading an educational initiative to make long-lasting and effective change. The Holocaust Center was actually first established in response to an anti-Semitic incident in our community. Here in San Francisco, more than 40 years ago, a neo-Nazi bookstore opened up, and there was an incident with local survivors who smashed a brick through the window of this bookstore, standing up to say, "We will not stand for this." The neo-Nazi community, white supremacist community, retaliated and threw bricks through the neighboring synagogue. And one of the responses from the then mayor, Dianne Feinstein, was the establishment of the Holocaust Center. And we continue our commitment to reaching more than 25,000 students, teachers, and community members each year. We're passionate about educating all generations in the values of social responsibility, and the Holocaust Center, as part of JFCS, supports more than 120,000 clients in crisis due to hunger, disease, wildfire, or guiding schools on how best to respond to anti-Semitism. People often ask me, how do you fight Holocaust denial? How do we fight anti-Semitism? And the conversation on this panel this evening is encouraging that you're in line with our thinking, and that is with education. Together with the ADL and the Marin County Office of Education, we have developed a 3-part series that will introduce anti-bias lessons to stop the escalation of hate in our community. and discuss the historical significance of these lists we've been discussing and how they were used for discrimination, deportation, and extermination, both in past and in present. These workshops will provide a safe space to ask questions and to really support our community to have an open dialogue. Together, we will explore the impact that bias has on individuals and communities. So you see the flyer next to me. In the coming days, we're going to distribute a survey countywide to students and teachers. We want to address the questions and concerns that you have, our community. What do you want? What do you wish to have in these workshops? We're going to have different types of workshops, some for students, some for teachers, some for parents, and some for administrators. We feel it's really important that the content connect to the audience, but it's not just going to be an audience. There's going to be interaction and opportunities for conversation. I'm excited to share that we're going to have archival documents on display, and we're going to bring some of our greatest teachers, our Holocaust survivors, as guest faculty to sharing their stories. Because one of the ways we feel that we can fight anti-Semitism is with creating empathy and understanding of our past, and that shapes for who we are in the future. Following our fall series, which you see on the flyer, we will be launching a winter series, which will focus on Take a Stand, Rescue and Resistance in the Holocaust. And then into the spring, we'll be discussing genocide awareness. It's important to study the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, not in a vacuum, but in looking at the patterns of genocide in history. And that will lead us to our final discussion as we explore what we've learned from this series and how this is just the beginning of an ongoing relationship between the JFCS Holocaust Center and the Marin County Office of Education. To make real change in our community, we must all work together.
Great. Morgan, thank you very, very much for being so responsive, so timely, collaborating with all the other partners. We appreciate it. So let me just say to all of you, thank you very, very much for participating. Thanks again to the panel, to Morgan, to the members of the team that pulled this together, especially Michelle Drake on the Marin County Office of Education team, who took a lead, Tara for being our coordinator tonight, and to all of you who participated. We look forward to the next time we can be together. And please know, go to the Marin County Office of Education website. I'm sure our districts will be sharing this information on their websites as well, but within 24 hours, you'll be able to access everything that you heard about, including all the resources. So with that, believe it or not, we have 3 minutes to spare. Enjoy your 3 minutes. And let's go back to Jamie's comment. Don't forget to hug your kids. Bye-bye, everybody.